Don't do that to the translators.
At least one thing more. Oh, let's speak slowly, right?
Yes.
It's in English.
All right. So, welcome again, officially. My name is Jillian York. I work for a US-based organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF. Personally, I'm based in Germany, and what our organization does is we started mostly doing legal work in the US, and so that's the basis of a lot of our work. But we also have, I think, I'm going to get the number wrong because we just did some reshuffling, but about 8 people based outside of the US, in Europe, in Latin America, and 1 person in Japan. Imagine that's a difficult, it's a very difficult time zone to connect from. But we also, in addition to our legal work, we build technology. So we have a tool that some of you might have heard of called Privacy Badger, which is a plugin available on Firefox, I think some of the other browsers as well. And we translate a lot of these tools too. So thanks to the community, I can say Privacy Badger was recently fully 100% translated to Arabic, as well as a number of other languages. We also translate a lot of our content. And we have in addition to the tools, we also have guides on digital security. One of them is called Surveillance Self-Defense, ssd.eff.org. I highly recommend checking it out. It's also available in about 11 languages, including Arabic and French, if that's helpful. And then finally, the third kind of pillar of our work is advocacy, activism. So it supports a lot of our legal work, but we also do a lot of coalition work, community-based work, educational work, and fight back against both governments and companies. And I'll pass it to Najm, but I will also just say we're missing 2 people today. One is Marwa Fatafta, who unfortunately had an emergency, and so I don't think she'll be here unless she walks in late. And the other who helped build this panel but couldn't attend in Beirut is Dia Kayali, who both of us worked with very closely as well.
Thank you, Jillian. Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Najm. I'm the Executive Director of SMEX. So, since we're introducing ourselves and our organizations, I haven't done this in other sessions, by the way. Okay. And the kind of work we do is we've been working on technology and human rights. Like we call it technology and human rights, but now it's becoming more like digital rights. We call it digital rights. We're going to talk about this in a minute. But now we're really more interested in like how we build the movement, how we can think of in the next 5 years, 10 years, like where are we heading? The challenges are bigger. 10, 15 years ago, myself and Jillian, maybe we were working with tech companies, trying to support people through tech companies because we had like the states, the evil in our region. And then we have tech companies where the Arab Spring happens and like there was access to social media platforms, access to organizing tools, access to collaborations. But now in 2025, we've seen what happened in October 7 and after October 7. And I liked how Reem framed it as like tech companies, she sees them as weapon companies, like companies that sells weapon. And that's actually a shift in how we think as well in terms of like our digital rights movement. So we really need all the kind of support from students, people in private sector, people who work in, I don't know, medical tools, like any kind of support. And my goal when we build this, I mean, basically I want to mention something like, we're doing this as a test because we're really interested, I'm interested on a personal level, how we can turn this into a course where we can actually do it in AUB or Lebanese University, or someone can do it in other countries as well. So we can actually really grow the movement from the peripheries and not only from the middle. So yeah, we'll start here. Give it to Jillian.
And I just want to add to that because I really, really support this goal as well. And I actually teach a master's course in Poland that focuses on a lot of this with mostly students from the EU, but actually some from North Africa in recent years as well, which is quite cool. So yeah, with that, we're going to go back in history a little bit, talk about what digital rights are and where the movement began, and some of the changes that we've seen happen that Anna just alluded to. So these are sort of the pillars of what we believe in. Digital rights are human rights. I'm going to read a lot more just because we have some translation. That we're committed human rights defenders, affirming that digital rights are human rights. That is a repeat, I love it. And so what that means is, of course, that the digital rights movement as we know it is a human rights movement, but it also means, and especially in recent years, that a lot of us have been collaborating with organizations that are outside of the traditional digital rights space, whether that's environmental organizations or organizations that are working for justice in Palestine or Sudan or whatever country requires such justice, for lack of a better way of framing it. Reproductive rights and women's organizations, etc., etc. So if you can imagine it, we can pull them into the movement, and there are a lot of different groups around the world that are doing that across different geographies. We also believe in the transformative power of access to information and self-expression, both online and offline, and assert that these rights are essential to peaceful, just, and prosperous societies. I love this statement. And that's a statement from SMEX, right? Yeah. So what encompasses digital rights? I would say that this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a lot of the stuff that we do, and we've provoked you with the question, what do you think is missing from this list? So we've got surveillance, we can talk about that a little bit more. Censorship, of course, digital infrastructure, and this comes up a lot in two ways, I would say. One, when we're talking about things like internet shutdowns, like what we saw in Gaza, but also what we see, every year in Algeria during the exam period, or in, I think, Iraq is another big one, but also across the sub-Saharan African continent, or section of the continent as well. This is a very common practice. But also access in communities that don't have access. We saw this a lot in the pandemic. Even in the US, where students who had to attend classes online, if they didn't have stable access to the internet at home, they were going to places like the McDonald's parking lot to access the internet. So this is really a global issue that you can see across different communities in different places. Obviously on a different scale, depending on where you are, but it affects people everywhere. Including in Europe, where those of us who live in Berlin know that the moment you step outside of Berlin, there's no stable internet in all of Brandenburg. Fun fact. It also means privacy, of course, network access.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, we can give you the mic.
Yeah. Join in whenever you're ready.
ready.
Marwa's here. Mis and disinformation, artificial intelligence, digital security, which we've alluded to as well, fair use and copyright, and net neutrality. You want to do this part? I can do the first one. Okay. So we listed just a few of the early influences in digital rights, and really just to note that this movement goes back to the 1990s or even the 80s, although I can't speak to the 80s quite well. So I'm going to start with the 90s, and the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, which was written by John Perry Barlow, one of the founders of my organization. I will say that this is now a controversial document, but it's very worth reading because it has a fascinating basis for a lot of the way that early work in this space started. This was written in Davos, the World Economic Forum, in 1996, and it starts with like this sort of we the people framing, very American in its framing, but it talked about sort of the independence of the people in building cyberspace, that we don't, we're not owned by any companies, any governments. The reason that it's now controversial is because and this is my personal belief, and I think one that's shared by a lot of people we work with, is that while it spoke strongly about the lack of interference needed from governments, it was not as critical as corporations. And I think that this set a lot of that early framing that you mentioned, where in the early days, a lot of us were much more willing to see companies as helpful collaborators, and we saw how that went. It did not go well, as I think you all know, even at the beginner level. Do you want to talk about the next one?
I think I met John Perry Barlow. Was it with you in DC in early? Maybe it was Anas and someone else. I met him in DC once, but he died after that. I guess I want to mention something about this is how this happened, probably as a reaction to the government, right? As a reaction to the government.
Absolutely.
But back then in 1996, companies were actually almost non-existing. I mean, there's a fun fact. Do you know that the internet was going to die and something made it not die? Do you know what is the thing that made the internet not die in that era or a bit before? World War II? No, no, 1992, 1995. It was porn.
Yeah, that's true.
It was porn that actually made the internet sustain itself at some point until it became a much bigger thing.
Don't forget the pop-up ad.
Yes. Yeah. This is Frank Lloyd is an important.
Yeah, and can you see?
No.
No, okay, never mind. Maybe if you know more about these next two, maybe I can pass it. Yeah. So the other two we have here, the Internet Rights Charter from APC in 2001, and the Joint Declaration on Freedom of Expression and the Internet from Frank LaRue and several government bodies in 2011. Are either of you able to speak to this?
Marwa, do you remember Frank LaRue? Do you want to talk about it? 2011?
Yeah. The Joint Declaration?
Yeah.
Stay. We can get to the mic.
أنا مش شايفة بس مش مكسر.
خلينا نشوف الكرسي.
Hi everyone, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
مروة اقعدي محلي وحجيب انا كرسي.
Okay.
I can't read anything.
Okay, so hi everyone. I can't see, I'm just seeing like ghosts in front of me because I'm having some eye issues unfortunately. So if I look weird,
You look great.
yeah, so just saying that up front. And just by way of introduction, my name is Marouf Talta, and I have been working on digital rights for quite a while. I'm currently leading the work of Access Now, which is an international digital rights organization in the MENA region, as the MENA Policy and Advocacy Director. And yes, the Frank, so this guy is or was the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression and Opinion. And in 2011, I think directly after the Arab Spring, made the first resolution in which he said or recognized the transformative power of the internet for people to exercise the rights of freedom of expression online, and also for the power of the internet to transform societies. And as I said, this was a direct comment following the Arab Spring, and it's an interesting also trajectory that we should probably comment on at the end of the presentation, of how the power of the internet was recognized in those early days as transformative, as positive, as liberating, as democratizing, which of course a decade after or more, those conclusions are questionable. Nevertheless, that was the first kind of recognition of as I said, the power of the internet to enable people to exercise and enjoy their human rights, and particularly the right to freedom of expression at the time.
And then just to list a few other early influences of meetings and formations, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, I'm sure we've left something out. The World Summit on Information Society in 2003, which was in Geneva, I believe, and then followed 2 years later, I'm looking over there to make sure I'm saying this correctly, 2 years later in Tunisia. And that one was particularly controversial because when it was held in Tunisia in 2005, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tunisians were not allowed to attend, so Tunisian advocates, not government, right? And so I think that created an awareness amongst some civil society members, particularly in the region, that not everyone was able to participate, not everyone was welcome to participate. And then that led to considerable organizing from Tunisians, but also from allies throughout the region and beyond. And then it followed 2005, followed the first Internet Governance Forum in 2006. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the Internet Governance Forum, or IGF. No, okay. Okay, who wants to explain the IGF? Oh. Don't make me do it.
Oh, well, it has actually a history from WISIS that I don't know.
It came from WISIS to IGF. 2005 to 2006.
Yeah, so
I don't remember the creation.
So the Internet Governance Forum, it's a UN space, and it happens annually. It's hosted every year by a different government. This year it was held in Sweden. Oh no, in Norway. I was there in Norway. Hosted by the Norwegian government. and last year it was hosted by Saudi Arabia, which was an interesting choice that civil society protested. Nevertheless, so the whole concept of the IGF is that it's a multi-stakeholder space where you see governments, companies, and civil society deliberating on how the internet should be governed. And obviously because these issues are fast-paced and ever-evolving, and every year there's sometimes like this one central or two central issues that dominate the agenda. And it has its own governance structure and secretariat and whatnot, but I think the most important thing to know about the IGF is that it's UN-led, and the whole concept of it that it should foster multi-stakeholderism approach to internet governance.
Can I tell a joke?
Yes. Please, by all means.
So, speaking of IGF, in 2014 or 2015, we were invited by UNESCO in Paris. Myself and Ahmed Gharbiya, he's another
plus 10, right? Was that the WSIS plus 10?
No, it was only to translate what IGF mean, what internet governance mean, and all the terminologies of internet governance to Arabic. And then we had someone from Saudi Arabia. So internet governance means in Arabic, حوكمة الإنترنت. What the Saudis insisted in this meeting, إدارة الإنترنت. So there was a big difference between حوكمة and إدارة.
Can you explain the difference for the English speakers?
Yes. So there's internet governance and management of the internet, and we insisted on keeping it حوكمة, keeping it internet governance because this is the name, this is the term, and it stayed like that. But what happened after is it stayed like that in terms of name, but they empty it totally from its name. So now you go to the IGF, and it's basically now companies, big tech, and government, and this is it. But we still go. Myself and Marwa were in IGF Oslo a few months ago in July.
And the Saudi Arabia one was really messed up because
I didn't go.
yes, because what happens is that how countries are decided, it's just a country says I would like to host the IGF, which means they pay for all the expenses, and so it's for
FIFA.
yeah, it's free for whoever wants to take it, and obviously the Saudi government is
It's a
interested
PR.
in
It's a
yes,
PR.
it's PR and wants to manage and they did manage civil society
Absolutely.
participation because we couldn't go. And those who went had their sessions taken down, and they were pretty harassed. So that's also part of the politics of the IGF.
And it's worth noting there are also regional IGFs that in some cases have been much more useful to people. I've only been to, I think, the one in Beirut many years ago, so I can't speak to them on the whole. But we've heard there was one recently in Iraq for the region. There's one, there's a Latin American one, a European one, etc. And I think those really vary by year and participation in terms of their usefulness. But if you do decide to get engaged, consider attending your regional IGF over the main one.
Yeah.
And then this is going to be my opinion. I would love for you guys to disagree if you'd like. But I personally, from my perspective, until the Arab Spring, there were not so many, let's say, civil society organized events. There were a few, of course. I mean, we've got people in the room who organize them. We had organizations that you'll see in the next couple of slides that organize smaller events. But globally speaking, a lot of the stuff that was happening before, maybe let's say 2008, 2009 rather than 2011, was led by these major organizations like the UN. And then what we saw in the ensuing years was the recognition and the need for more civil society organized events, and that's where we see things created like the Circumtech Festival, which is the precursor to the global gathering that I know some of you know of. RightsCon, which started in
2011.
2011. Yeah, that's a mistake. I'm so sorry. The first one was 2011. I didn't make that slide. And then has been going on since then, almost every year, with the exception, I think, of the pandemic live. Yeah?
I want to mention something.
Yeah, please.
Especially that Sami here with us in the room, Sami Gharbiya.
That's why I keep going like this too. I'm just trying not to name him.
So something also we need to know about the region, like how I personally think about digital rights movement is because I was a bit like sneaking in and like Arab techies, Arab bloggers meeting where Sami was organizing back in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 in Beirut. So I would like when Sami feels comfortable, if you want to share a few things for the new digital rights people, I would like Sami just to say a few things about why they were meeting. Because I remember we were meeting, we were talking about, Sami was showing us tracking the plane of the president. I mean, it was like new tools using YouTube
2009 meeting.
and using like other kind of softwares. And I was like, wow, you can actually do accountability, you can actually do transparency through these tools. And then these tools were used for maybe pressure on accountability somehow. I don't know. ما بعرف سامي حابة تقول شيء هلا ولا ما شوي؟
Sure, no, yeah. So, مرحبا, hello, everybody.
English, yeah.
Yeah, English. So, my name is Sami Bougharbia. I'm from Tunisia, and I was in exile back in the Netherlands during the pre-revolution era under Ben Ali regime. And so the years 2099, it was the start of the blogging phenomenon. Everyone has blogged before that. We had forums for discussion, open debates, and then we had blogs. And thanks to actually two big, let's say, phenomenon, global voices. I was advocacy director by then. Before that, and then we have the, we felt the need to understand technology and mix that with freedom of expression and access to information, because most of the region were subject to online censorship, to access to information, and to the problem of spreading information. And so we had the magic of empathy and discussion between Arab, actually, techies, and the leader of them was Ali Abdel Fattah, Ahmed Mkawi, Mona, Noura Yunus, etc. And we managed to get some funding to organize first the Arab Techies Collective, to bring together freedom of expression advocates and bloggers to the techies, and started building tools, started translating tools into Arabic, and starting providing circumvention technology, understanding VPN, etc., etc. And then we felt the need to start the Arab Bloggers Conference here in Beirut, 2009.
2008 was the first one.
2008, it was here in Beirut, and then 9, and then the third it was in Tunis after the revolution. And we managed it in a way to build a movement across the Arab world of digital activists and freedom of expression advocates. So that was literary history. Thanks.
You know, I want to also mention, Sami mentioned something about translating. Like when my generation, and I think I'm a bit younger than Sami, but like when my generation started using the technology and the computers and the laptop, there was no Arabic keyboards available on this. So our generation created what we call Arabizi, like the 3, the 7, and it was like a bit revolutionary because our parents cannot know what we're talking about. The regimes doesn't know what these people are talking about. So it was kind of revolutionary. Now I hate this language because all the young people use it. And I was like, why are you still writing this? We don't need it anymore. We have the Arabic. Khalas, go to Arabic.
No, and I think I'm really grateful for Sami's contribution, because I think I spoke a little bit incorrectly to say that there were definitely things happening regionally before those years. I think from my perspective, 2008, 2009 through 11 is when we had cross-regional collaboration more than before. But I mean, in the Arab world, in Europe, in the US, and Latin America, there was a lot of organizing going on within the regions. It just hadn't quite crossed paths for the most part, except for in these UN spaces. And I just wanted to flag these slides. I know my organization's on there, I didn't put it, but we've been around since 1990, so I guess that makes us pretty old. Same with APC, the Association for Progressive Communications, which was founded by Andrea Esterhuizen in South Africa in 1990 as well, so also goes way back. And then IFEX, which I think we've got some members of in the room, we're members. It's a membership organization for different groups from all over the world, most of whom up until about 10 years ago were primarily like free press organizations and traditional freedom of expression organizations, but they've evolved also to be very inclusive. of digital rights orgs, and they've been around, founded in Canada in 1992, and they have a global staff now as well. And then we also put Global Voices, which Sammy already talked about, and EDRI, which is the European Digital Rights Initiative, also an umbrella organization that brings together different groups, founded in 2002, to bring EU perspectives to digital rights. But again, in recent years, they've also started bringing in groups from outside of Europe, and so you do have now some participation from the region.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, speaking of generations, so these two are the first generation of digital rights activists.
Thanks to Sammy, he brought me into this space. He could take me out.
I consider myself second generation because I started writing actually for global business. Hey, I'm talking about work, huh? Yeah, I started working on digital rights in Palestine, actually writing for Global Voices. They offered space for people who care about digital rights to write in their own countries. And at the time, 2015, yes, it's when Israel started arresting people, young kids, over their social media posts, and that was my interest point. So I owe Global Voices a lot of...
Me too.
Yeah.
So, no, I'll just switch to the next slide. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll take this one. This is very U.S. centric, but it's important because it's no. So I'll take this one as the American on the panel. So the Communications Decency Act was a bill put forward in 1996 by Bill Clinton, or maybe proposed in 95, but I'm bad with years, in order to basically create laws in the U.S. that would have heavily restricted things like pornography, obscenity, indecency, etc. This law never passed, thankfully. Well, thankfully from my perspective, you might disagree, but there was one section of it, Section 230, and you'll often just hear people call this Section 230 or CDA 230, even though it's a standalone law. And this has been referred to as the 26 words that govern the internet in the US. Now, we're not talking about the US in this session, so why do we care? Because what happens in the US, or at least historically, has had an impact on the rest of the world. And this one's really important because it is what governs platforms. And all of us are using US platforms even if we're desperately trying to move away from them these days. So what the law says is that no provider or user of an interactive computer service, which has been defined since in case law, and I can explain that, shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So there's two things to note here, because when you hear US senators talk about this, they get the law wrong. So I'm going to explain it very clearly. There are two things, this and the First Amendment in the US, which I think you've probably heard of, even if you don't know it by heart. The First Amendment is what allows platforms to govern their spaces as they see fit. So it's actually the First Amendment that allows them to kind of do whatever they want in terms of saying, hey, we're not going to allow cats on this platform, but we're going to allow dogs. That's the First Amendment. 230, on the other hand, is what allows these platforms to not be held legally liable for most content that they host. So they can be held liable for things like child sexual abuse imagery. There are carve-outs to this law, but the vast majority of things, Meta, TikTok, whatever US company we're talking about, can't be held liable even when made aware of most content. So this includes things like harassment, hate speech in other countries, etc. And this is one of the reasons why we've seen such inconsistent moderation from these platforms, even in situations where we would want moderation to happen. Feel free to add to that.
Yeah. I just want to add to what Julian says, is maybe in 2015, 2016, I personally noticed this, and there was a debate or conversation about how tech companies are, now we're calling them tech companies, right? And it's normal, but back then we were are they social media companies? Are they a publisher? Are they a tech company? But they're the three of them, all of it together. So I started senses how powerful they are going to become. And back then we were saying, they might be stronger than government. Now, tech companies are much stronger than governments. They are much stronger than any country maybe. So there was a shift between 2015 and 2016. We were challenging this. And also we were thinking are they going to affect media as well, media platforms? Because now if we think, we have Noura runs a media platform in Egypt, Can she survive outside Facebook? Can she survive outside Instagram? Also, for example, Miriam here, like they run impressive media in Lebanon. Can they actually survive outside the social media bubble? And that is a problem. Like those platforms now control what we publish in terms of media. And so this is something that we are still thinking about. We don't know where is the conversation right now. I stopped following this conversation specifically. But this is something that we started thinking about in 2015, 2016.
Can I add something?
Yeah, and then
Julia, just very quickly, I mean, there was also at the time this debate whether, for example, Facebook is a publisher or not. Because if they're a publisher, then obviously they will assume the role of an editor, which means that they are responsible for the content that people publish on their websites. And then I think the discussion was settled that they're not, and therefore, as Julian said, they are not to be held liable for most of the content that is published on their websites, except for, I think, unlawful speech.
only certain unlawful.
Yes, there's
Yeah,
unlawful
very
speech. And I think that tension got researched, I do recall 2021, when there were discussions of possible reform. Or even now, for example, when you say, well, tech companies should assume responsibility for the harms they are facilitating through what user-generated content for what people post online. But then also for civil society organizations, they say, oh, okay, we also want to protect people's freedom of expression, because if the companies then assume the role of an editor, they will crack down on people's speech. So I think this is one of the, Section 230 is one of the sticky issues in digital rights discussions, where you want to protect it because you want to protect freedom of expression, and at the same time, we recognize that these companies, their role is way bigger than just an editor, and they should assume responsibility for the harms they facilitate intentionally or by omittance or recklessness.
Yeah, and I think there's a great session, I don't know if it's happened yet, but on business and human rights and how that interplays with holding companies accountable, and I think that we do also need to look at alternative ways. The other thing I would say, just to say what you said about 2021, every year, sometimes multiple times a year, there are bills proposed to try to reform Section 230. What's happening right now, the biggest issue in the US that's focused on this, and I think you'll start to see this happening elsewhere, it's already happening in the UK, in Europe, in Australia, is age verification laws. And so in the US, you've got the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, that's been proposed that would require people under 18 to, basically show ID and then be restricted from portions of the internet. None of this is finalized. We've opposed it, and I think the reason for that is often, I think, agree to disagree on this, but often kids are, not safe at home, and so restricting them from being able to access information safely online prevents their own safety. And so, we can say, okay, maybe parents should restrict the internet, but a lot of them don't. And so it is a complicated issue. We've got a lot of resources on it, but I don't want to spend time on it because we are only on slide 10. So we're going to push through a couple because I think we have time check. I'm good at this. Okay, I'm good at rushing. So I'm gonna skip this one, but just to say that we recognize that US law has an outsized impact. EU law is also increasingly important in this space. The Digital Services Act in Europe, as well as the Digital Markets Act, which again, I think all of our organizations have some resources on our websites. But then just to note a couple of other places in the world, Brazil and India have often been on the cutting edge of internet regulation. And within the US, you've got state law that can have a big impact. And within the EU, German norms and law, unfortunately, have had a big impact. And I think as we've seen what's been happening in Germany in the last couple of years around freedom of expression, this is a scary precedent.
Can I just
Yes,
say
please.
this? I think also, if Digital Rights 101, Europe has been, the EU that is specifically, for better or for worse, they have been leading legislation, like setting standards on certain legislation. So moving a bit from freedom of expression, data protection, for example, the GDPR, the general data protection regulation.
Privacy law in Europe.
It's what makes you click accept cookies on websites.
Precisely, it's But yeah, it has been transformative. While it applies to the EU, it did create what the Europeans like to call the golden standard of data protection. They're trying to do the same with the Digital Services Act, and I think the Trump administration is not so happy about it because they don't want their companies to be regulated. But if you look at the regulatory landscape, often the EU is the one that is trying to spearhead the regulation of the digital ecosystem.
Yeah.
So.
And we're gonna just jump with a couple slides real quick, and then I will pass it back. I promise. So I think this is just important to mention, digital colonialism. We've talked about this, the ways in which US and EU laws and regulations have an outsized influence. And one area that a lot of us work on, and that's why I think it's important to mention, is terrorist and violent extremist content. TVEC, I hate this acronym. But what we've seen in this area is the ways in which companies create rules about who is allowed to speak on their platforms. And so some of those entities, such as groups that are designated by the United States government as terrorist organizations, I think everyone knows who I'm talking about. Basically, this is a way in which US law regulates clearly what platforms in the US, but sometimes outside of the US, will host. We're seeing more influence from the UN and European, and more recently the UK list with respect to Palestine action. So for example, Meta used to only restrict groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, groups that are on the US list. Now that we've seen the UK add Palestine action, we're seeing platforms respond to that by restricting groups like that. So you can see how this might have a trickle-down effect to nonviolent, that is a nonviolent organization, or at least nonviolent against people. And so I think we're going to see more and more of this happening, and this is something that I think is really important to push back on as well. I'm gonna jump forward and then, let me give it to you guys for this section. Do you wanna do this, or do you wanna skip? Because we talked about it a bit. Okay, we're gonna skip that, we're gonna skip that, we're gonna skip that. Let's talk about this. I think this is important.
The Myanmar,
the
yes,
the pivotal, yeah.
I think it's important.
the Facebook report,
Yeah,
right?
let's do it. There's some notes here.
Well, I can't
Oh,
read,
you
but I
can't
can
read.
tell you.
Sorry.
Okay, I can tell you.
Just talk about
I'll talk about it, and then you can, if there's anything I dropped. So in Myanmar, during the junta coup, the military coup, Facebook. So before Meta was Meta, Facebook there's been investigations, and especially from the UN fact-finding mission in Myanmar, in which for the first time it's been recognized explicitly that Facebook played, and I quote, a significant role in spreading hate speech that led to the genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar. And that freaked out the hell out of Meta, or Facebook. And quickly thereafter, they published the first corporate human rights policy, in which they vow to identify human rights risks or the negative impacts of their policies and actions, and try to mitigate that. It was I think it was in March 2021 or 2020 when that they published their first corporate human rights policy. Yet I think, as you know very well, 2021 Sheikh Jarrah protests, Syria, now the genocide and Palestine, and all the hate speech that proliferated, and incitement to genocide. And even though incitement to genocide is in fact an international crime, it's not just hate speech, but it's a crime defined in international law, the company doesn't really care. So a lot of that content remains to proliferate. But I think it was important because there's a lot of talk about hate speech and offline harm. But it's hard for researchers, for civil society, for activists to link between the content and its actual consequences on the ground. And then I think that was the closest we got to in terms of recognizing the harms that these companies facilitate and the consequences of incitement to genocide or hate speech on communities, on people, and effectively the commission and perpetration of international crime that is genocide.
Yeah, and just because this relates so closely to Palestine, I just want to say that our colleague Dia has written a lot about this, and you can find their reports online. But there's evidence that Facebook was made aware of their role in the genocide, and specifically that there were Burmese government officials using Facebook to incite violence. They were made aware of this in 2013, I believe, 5 years before, don't quote me on that year, I could be like a year off, but 2013, 5 years before the UN fact-finding mission, and this was due to a Reuters journalist, if I recall correctly, who was very persistent in trying to make them aware and ineffective in doing so because they basically didn't care. The other piece of evidence that we have is that during this period, before the changes that happened that Marwa mentioned, they had, I can't remember the number, but it was fewer than 8 Burmese speakers moderating content. This is a country of more than 80 million people with an ongoing genocide that Facebook was aware of, and they had less than 8 people moderating content there. And so we can see how, I mean, there are more Arabic content moderators, there's a lot of issues with them, we don't have time to get into that in detail, but you can see from this example just how little I think sometimes these companies care, and how they only respond when there's significant external pressure to do so. Maybe we just go here. Yeah.
You know, I just want to mention like small anecdotes about the Meta, what's it called, Facebook back then. It's like also it's worth noting that in 2013 they started something called Transparency Report, and this was a response to civil society asking them like, what do you give data to the government, who you're talking to, what kind of content is being restricted. So they started to do like a 6 months report every time, and they increased the countries, and they added some information, but we found out, of course, even like few years after this report, it was a PR stunt more than anything else. It was not really solving the problem. It was not really putting the finger on the problem itself. So it was just like business as usual for them.
Yeah, so we're running short on time, so we were not able to talk about every point in history, but we're going to be refining these slides and I believe sharing them. And there are also some great timelines out there, so hopefully there's a way to follow up. Yeah. If you're interested in more of these topics, and we can share more content, but we're just going to go past the history now and take us to digital rights in 2025, where we sit now.
Something that I want to mention, digital rights in 2025, and I think it's important about regulation at least, is the AI. So we have EU AI Act, and this is something that is really bothering the US. Because I'm not sure if you heard Peter Thiel a few days ago or a few weeks ago, he's saying like, he said in a private conversation, regulating AI is antichrist, something like that.
Yeah. Tell them who Peter Thiel is in case they don't.
Yeah, so if you don't know who he is, he started PayPal, and also more importantly, Palantir. Like there's this weird company that does a lot of surveillance. So it's important to understand like the movement in the US, like the Trump administration and all these businessmen, if you see the dinner that he organizes sometimes for them, they pay a lot of money in his campaign, but also they are all anti-regulation. And they are all trying to pressure the EU to go in this direction. So I feel like the fight is coming. The fight is there on AI, of course, because EU have EU AI Act, right? So this has been approved a couple of years ago, maybe.
There's anti-regulation and anti-rights.
Yes. So this is a combination to see. There's something about the funding. I'll come to it.
Yes, so digital rights in 2025. I think there are a few things to point to this history and trajectory. One is that, yes, the fight has remained the same, but also we have additional agenda items added to them. So where we started, it was about the right to privacy, it was about freedom of expression. We were mainly focused on platform accountability or like social, yes. But now there is AI, now there is internet shutdowns, which we haven't talked about, even now, not even internet shutdowns, but the full destruction of ICT infrastructure, as we've seen in Gaza, in Syria before that, in Yemen. And also from the company side themselves, you know, we talked about the IGF, we talked about the regulation, and the companies were like happy riders as well with us. And sometimes they saw us as allies. For example, when they were shut down in certain countries, I think in Nigeria, Twitter was blocked, and they came to civil society and say, hey, freedom of expression, let's fight for it together. Now, that facade had dropped, especially with the election of Trump in the US. They no longer pretend. In the opening ceremony, we touched upon like very, very briefly that, for example, certain companies like Google that had certain self-nominated principles or self-proclaimed principles, like that they will never deploy their AI for surveillance or harming people. They just dropped it in the beginning of the year. Now, most of the companies, with no exception, so Meta, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Palantir, they're all either investing or deploying their technology for military applications. And at the same time, the US government has, Trump had made one of his crazy posts on, what is his platform called? Truth Social, like with capital letters, basically telling governments that don't get close to our quote-unquote beautiful tech companies, because it's part of the race towards AI domination and hegemony. I think both governments and the companies see AI as the future of technology, and therefore it's also a ticket for governments to stay dominant. And obviously for the US it's a huge source for domination. So if you read into, for example, the development of AI, the investment of AI, and also supply chains like rare earth minerals that are important for the manufacturing of chips, the process, building of data centers in our region here over the past 3 years, we saw that the biggest companies, big tech, so Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, racing towards building new data centers and cloud infrastructure, especially in the Gulf, so in the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So the fight has changed in a way, while we're still fucking stuck in the old problems. That is, people's content has been taken down, people are being censored, hate speech is proliferating. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Sweden, Syria, and in Gaza, I mean, these issues remain, but Meta doesn't care. Remember after the Facebook paper, so whenever there's whistleblowing and the exposure of how the companies really don't care about the region, they don't provide the right resources, all their content moderations all over the place. Meta decided to launch its metaverse, which is a joke. That didn't go anywhere, but still it signals to you the direction in which these companies are going. So we are, I think, in a very, not a very exciting place in terms of, but we've had wins along the way. We've had wins along the way, that's for sure. I don't think we should underestimate that. But also our community needs to grow.
Yep.
I think maybe we are here also to recruit new digital rights warriors.
I mean, yeah, this is exactly the point. I'll continue from where Marwa ended. I mean, for the student in this room, please feel free to jump on this mission. If you're gonna do your master's degree, you wanna volunteer, you wanna work on digital rights, please talk to us. There's a big need, there's a shift. We are alone as citizens of these nations against tech companies and against governments to actually fight for our own right to exist, not only online space. It's AI. It's gonna take everything we have. It's gonna take everything we own. So we really need to understand the threats that we have, and we really need to really act on this. So we are interested in turning this into a course for students, but we really want to grow as a movement, and we really need your help, all of you. If you are academic or a journalist or I don't know, a techie, there's a big need for all of us to be joining this fight.
Where can people get more information if they want to learn more? I'll just write it up here.
Where should we start?
Smex.
Yeah, okay, let's start smex.org. Put your website, Marwa's website, access.org.
So you want to resist AI?
I mean, I think one of the main conversations that are now happening around AI is like governing AI. We really need to think about, like, it's basically, it's a monster that you're just opening all over the places. Like, it needs to be regulated.
Can I?
Yeah, but please.
So, resisting AI. I mean, I don't want to open a philosophical question because there are different schools about this. There are people who believe that AI is inevitable. There is no way that you can stop it. So it's a question of governance, right? And all discussions about AI governance are happening in the global north. And you rarely see any input from our region. Meaning, for example, how does AI has been impacting our lives the past 2 years with how Israel has been deploying AI in Gaza. So AI applications for military purposes or for surveillance has been completely missing from discussions on AI governance. Everyone talks about AI governance from human rights perspective, and you have Western. And I talk from experience, sitting among AI regulators from, let's say, the EU. They are obsessed about China. That's the discussion, right? For them, the biggest danger is China and Russia, and for us, we're being killed by AI. Why can't we just discuss this right now? The first AI convention, right? Was launched by the Council of Europe, and it was in 2024, and it had, guess who? The US, the EU, the UK, and Israel. And it talks about AI, democracy, and human rights. and that came directly after the few revelations about Lavender and Where's Daddy and the Gospel. So that gives you a glimpse into how the discussions about AI governance are going. So I think it's important for us to be in those spaces. And the second thing, which is just as important, and you will see it reflected in the Bread&Net agenda, there's a lot of discussion about building autonomous infrastructure that serves us, and also digital tools that serve us, that look like us, that speaks our language, that doesn't censor us. So there are, I think, a lot of debates around how can we achieve that independence, which is hard for our region, because you don't want the government to come close to anything related to online spaces. And at the same time, we can't rely on spaces mediated and provided by American big tech anymore, because as we've seen, at least in the context of Palestine, if, let's say, a human rights organization gets designated as a terrorist organization, bye-bye. They're kicked off the internet. They can't have their service hosted by companies. They can't stay on social media platforms. This is an urgent issue for us. Like, how can we build alternative infrastructure that serves us in the region? And that's, I think, in my opinion, another pathway towards resistance. So I myself, I'm very curious about these discussions, and I'm planning, to plug in and go attend those sessions, because this is where the fight is at. Yeah.
I mean, I want to give some examples about like infrastructure. I mean, basically, us as an organization, we adopted Google platforms, all of it. We were happy, it solved all the problem. You have the chat, you have the Google Drive, you have everything. Now, we're actually thinking seriously, like, what can we do? Where are the other things we can adopt? We really need to leave these platforms. I mean, I know the services that we'll move to, it's not going to provide the same level of flexibility, but at least if it provides 80% or 90%, that's really fair for us. And I'm sure Access Now and EFF and other organizations are thinking the same. We are having this problem in terms of, like, these companies are they control the data that we use, they control everything. So this is a big problem.
I have a question. Do you think the public will stand with you? Or would,
Well, I guess let's try to finish here and we can open the conversation. Are we done?
Are we going to lose the room, though? That's my only question. I can hang out, but...
I'm not sure.
At 1:15, I think. At 1:15, the next session.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's finish in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And let's open the
We should
conversation.
get out that way.
So
Okay, so I'll come back to that question. I'm gonna wrap up so that we can walk out as soon as the other folks need the room, but then we can talk about that question. And I think we can also hang out outside. Yeah. If you want to approach any of us directly, we can hang out out front in front of the building. But yeah, I just want to do the official wrap up. Mo, first, is there a way for people to get more information about Digital Rights 101? Like apart from our websites, will there be any follow-ups?
Yes, there will be follow-ups. If you want to, leave your emails.
Cool.
And we will follow up with you.
We'll put out a piece of paper and or pass it around or whatever.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we will just make a not a mailing list, but just we'll send you out more information on ways you can follow up. These are the websites of our organizations. If there's anyone in the room who's also working for a digital rights organization and wants to add it for the folks in the room, feel free. Didn't want to do that without consent. And these are our handles on Blue Sky, which I think is the platform that most of us are on these days. So feel free to follow us, feel free to hit us up there. And then for the public question, I think coming from 3 different countries, and working in 3 different, so we're all from one country and we all have lived in 1 or more other countries. So I think that it really depends on the country. I mean, I'm from the US and I think that by and large the public right now is either disengaged or on the side of Trump, which is very difficult. There's obviously a lot of people who advocate in these spaces, and one of the things that my organization does is try to engage students in the same way. We've worked with a lot of student groups, work in coalition with some student groups depending on the issue, particularly on immigration justice in the US, but it's an uphill battle there. Germany, the country that I currently live in, with the exception of the issue of Palestine right now, big exception obviously, I would say that the German public by and large is more engaged on some of these issues, particularly privacy, and that has a lot to do with the historical context with the GDR and the historical surveillance that existed there. Of course, I think this might also change as younger generations who didn't experience that era grow up and care less about privacy, are much more likely to use platforms that don't have strong privacy policies. But 10 years ago when I first moved there, most people I know wouldn't use Google. Like they weren't using major platforms, instead they were using open source tools, and this is a good alternative politically. It's not always a good alternative functionally, let's say. What about you? Do you guys want to add from various country perspectives? Or?
Oh, I mean, I can just say that I don't know if the public will be on our side or not. The thing is the public really aware? That is a question I don't think so. Because, for example, the way people adopted ChatGPT for me was insane. Like completely, they were uncritical adoption of that tool. I remember I was in Palestine visiting my family when this Studio Ghibli.
Yeah.
Do you remember this animation, the Japanese? And everyone, like my brother, my brother's wife, their children, like everyone was uploading their photos on ChatGPT to get the animation. And I thought, guys, like, do you understand that this is basically they are using us as testing ground? They're making it fun so people can volunteer the pictures which are used to train the system. So we are, yes, I don't think people are aware of how the tools use them and abuse them and exploit them. And even if they are aware, there is a question of alternatives, of course. And to what extent alternatives can be protective of their rights, for instance. But to what extent your friend uses WhatsApp versus Signal. I also use my mother as the ultimate sample of an ordinary human being that uses technology just to chat and to call me, and check on her neighbors and whatnot. Yeah, she would not use Signal, she uses WhatsApp. So I think that is something that
and she knows better.
Yeah, they know better.
Most techies.
Yeah, and then, or they don't know, but so there is part of this fight, of course, societal awareness about the tools, about their rights, about also what is behind the tools, and the data and the exploitation and that.
I'm gonna speak briefly about Lebanon. Like we've been working on a few things. And some of the things are actually getting positive response. Like for example, we're working on like the telecom sector in terms of like regulation. And we have a session today at 4 p.m. with Wasim and Abid. So please attend it if you want to know more. There's also 2 deputies on this session because we're really working hard on how we can regulate telecom sector in Lebanon. And we have actually approached to reach some positive goals. And another point, we're also thinking about privacy in Lebanon and how much people they are unaware about these issues in terms of like practices, even like the state. Like for example, when there's an election happen, if you live in Dubai, they will send you one email. If you live in Dubai, they will send you an email that exists your personal data and like 10,000 other people from Dubai, Lebanese, just to double check your data if it's accurate or not. But you'll have access to all the other data. So there is a lack of culture in terms of privacy that we're trying to push towards. And also there's a lack of regulation that we also want to push towards. And to be honest, like how the drone has all these information about us in Lebanon is some of it because of this, because they collect so many passive data from all the databases that exist in Lebanon.
I think on that note, we should wrap up to give respect to the next folks coming in. But thank you so much. I think the sign up is still going around. We can also take it into the hallway if anyone didn't get a chance to see it. Thank you for being an excellent audience, and I hope to see you outside.